Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. I'm Joanne Donoghue. I'm an assistant professor here at the New York Institute of Technology, College of Osteopathic Medicine. I am joined with my student, Minna Devon.
Hello.
You just give them a little bit about your background.
Okay, I'm a current third-year student at NYITCOM, and I previously did my undergraduate degree in nutritional biochemistry and metabolism at Case Western Reserve University. And would you like to talk a little bit about yourself?
Right, so today's topic is pretty near and dear to my heart because although I have 2 degrees in nutrition and exercise physiology, it's near and dear to me because I'm also a triathlete and an aging triathlete and a marathon runner. I've done Ironmans. And what got me interested in the topic we're talking about is how many questions I get asked by females about, you know, I'm training for a marathon, I'm gaining weight. I'm training for a marathon and I don't understand, my body's changing. I don't know what I should be eating. What am I doing wrong? So like many women out there, I struggled with the same things. I have all this knowledge and I have absolutely no idea, you know, how do you apply this knowledge and how are you supposed to know what to eat? And for the people who are watching at home, I know I always ask people 2 basic questions that I don't think many of you can probably answer about yourselves. And one is, how many calories should you be taking in? And most people say, I really have no idea. And then the other question is, how many calories are you burning in a day? So if I asked you that about your car, you would probably be able to answer that question. I could ask people, how much mileage do you get in your car? If you were going to drive from here in 300 miles, how much gas would you need to fill up? But yet you can't ask that about your own body. And most people who put themselves through these long training regimens have no idea how they're supposed to fuel their bodies.
And why I personally got interested in this study is, in addition to my nutrition background, I was very interested to see kind of in the young 20s age group and the age cohort that I live in, as well as medical students in general. I was really interested to see how working a training regimen into your lifestyle could kind of change, because some people kind of do it to not necessarily check off their bucket list, but they don't really see how it'll fit in their entire lifestyle in general. So I thought it was really interesting to see, as well as look at body image and body image perspectives in different ages, and kind of see how that played a role into their everyday diets. So I guess starting out with questions.
For you. So one of the things that I find interesting is if you look at the statistics of women in sports. So in the 1980s, under 10% of women ran marathons. As a matter of fact, women were not allowed in the Olympics for marathons until 1984, which was not that long ago. So if you look at the research that's out there, it's mostly research done on male runners. And male and women, they're very different with the way we metabolize. So there's very little research on female runners, which is why we actually pursued this. The second thing was resting metabolic rate. Now, a lot of people don't know what resting metabolic rate is, so I'm just going to go a little bit into what that is. So everybody out there, we all have a resting metabolic rate. And what that means is that's the minimum amount of calories that we need to function in everyday life. If I sat in a chair all day and I did nothing, it's the minimum amount of calories that your organs need, that your brain needs. But we add a little bit more to that number for everyday activities, such as moving arms, typing keyboards, things like that. We add a little bit in for thermic effect of digesting food, very minimal amount. And then the other thing comes from exercise. So most people don't know what their resting metabolic rate is. There are websites that can give you estimates, and it is always estimates. But the way we do it here is really the gold standard. It's something called indirect calorimetry. Just to give you an idea of what that is, we lay people under a hood, looks like this, a little bit of an alien hood like this, and they lay under this, and we're measuring their oxygen intake and their carbon dioxide output. And they lay under there for 15 minutes. It gives us a rough estimate of what your resting metabolic rate is. And that is what we did with female runners on our campus who were training long distances. Over 30 miles per week was considered long distance. They were training for marathons. And we also took middle distance runners as well.
And the main thing with this was doing recreational runners, because a lot of studies in today's society look at like elite athletes and professional runners, but we kind of wanted to look at your average recreational runner. And what was also cool about the indirect calorimetry is it not only looked at how many calories you were burning at a given point in time, but it broke it down to show how many carbohydrates, what percentage of fat, and what percentage of protein you were breaking down at any given point in time. And our study also focused on a term called restricted energy deficit. So I don't know if you wanted to go into a little bit more about restricted energy deficit.
Right. So in the science world, it is a little bit of a controversial term because it's new. We've all heard of amenorrhea in female athletes who are underweight. But restricted energy deficit actually applies to male athletes and female athletes. It's almost that in between where your energy, when we need a certain amount of calories to perform the test that we're going to do. But when you don't maintain that, you're in a deficit. Now, we would lose weight in a deficit, but for runners, it could affect performance. It could lead to overtraining. It's very new in the stages of research, but what we wanted to see is if our female runners were in an energy deficit, what does that do to your resting metabolic rate? So your resting metabolic rate is affected by a couple of things. One is lean body mass. So the more lean body mass that we have, the higher your resting metabolic rate is. So you could have a 130-pound female runner. One can be 35% fat, one can be 10% fat with more lean body mass. They're going to have a different resting metabolic rate. So that's one of the things why we test them. We don't go by the scale. A BMI is not accurate for an athlete at all because it doesn't take into account muscle mass and fat mass. So that was another outcome of the study.
Yeah, and what we also wanted to kind of delve into was that everyone thinks that when you're training for a marathon, the key is to restrict calories and just kind of exercise more and build up that exercise, but it's really about just being smarter with your diet and knowing the amount of carbs you're taking in, because carbohydrates, what we will go into later, is something we kind of saw that a lot of our athletes weren't really aware of how many carbohydrates they were taking in, whether they were taking in enough, and stuff like that. So it's more looking at the specific nutrients you're taking in and being smarter about the diet and looking at your individual body type and what works for your body when you're training.
Right, and the beauty of the study was that there is a generational gap, obviously, between my students and myself. I grew up in an era, and a lot of you out there who might be more of my age runner, we remember the quote Snackwell generation, where everything was fat-free, and carbs were okay. And now we're going into a new era where we look on the internet and everything is high protein, high fat, and carbohydrates are bad. And I think Minna can speak more for that because you're in college now and you realize that that's mostly what females think.
Definitely.
So one of the findings we found that I think was alarming in our study was how little carbohydrates our long-distance female runners were taking in. So our female runners ended up being in something called a 40-40-20 ratio. So everybody heard of what percentage ratio is. We have three macronutrients. We have carbohydrates, we have protein, and we have fat. Carbohydrates fuel our body. There's something with the ketogenic diet now where people are going more towards fat fueling your body, but carbohydrates are what fuel us, and too little carbohydrates will affect performance. What we found is our long-distance female runners, not only were they eating only about 200 calories more than their resting metabolic rate, which is definitely putting them in an energy deficit, but they were only taking in 40% carbohydrates. They were taking in 40% fat and 20% protein. So the ratio for someone who's training is extremely important. Yeah. Now, I'm going to go into something that was even more alarming about it, is that the average female athlete, we would want to see that number up about 60%. Mm-hmm. The recommendation now is you would like to see about 5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. The average female was 132 pounds, and she was only taking in our study, the females were roughly taking in 160 grams of carbohydrates. They should be taking in close to 300. They were almost half of what they should be taking. Yeah. So another alarming part of the study is that we found not only were the carbohydrates so little, but their sugar intake was extremely high. So we have something called free sugars now that you can look at it's actually on the new food labels, yep. Right? You look and you see carbohydrates, you see sugars, and it'll say something called free sugar. So what's free sugar? Mm-hmm. If you want to go into what free sugar is.
I mean, it's pretty much just all the added sugars that are added and more simple sugars rather than complex carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates are very good for you. It's what you should be eating necessarily more of for use for energy and exercise. Now the simple sugars are the ones that are necessarily much more bad for you, and that's going to be those added sugars that are seen in processed foods and stuff like that.
Right. So it raises your glycemic, it raises your blood sugar quicker and makes it it drops more. So I use as a reference. So the World Health Organization now and the American Heart Association, I'm going to use a teaspoon as a judge for this. 5 of these is what they recommend your limit should be per day, okay? So this is about 25 grams of sugar a day, free sugar again. The long distance runners in our study, as little as their carbohydrate intake was, they were taking 14 teaspoons of sugar a day, just to show you the difference in grams. So that was an alarming part of the study. And we did work with middle distance runners also, who still were way above it. They were still above their base sugar, but still low in carbohydrates. And I think the macronutrient problem that we have seen probably comes from most runners today get their information from online fad diets and what's popular.
Yeah, and what's not necessarily good about that is it's simply the opinion of someone. So it's what worked for someone else, but that necessarily may not be what works for your body type. So that's why we've really want to stress that it is good to go and see what works for your body type and kind of take that into account when you're thinking about what diet you're going to use while you're training for a marathon or running recreationally.
So this is going to go into more of what we feel with recreational runners, why we didn't test athletes on campus, why we did recreation, is the yo-yo dieting effect that we normally see in our society today. You know, we see so many fad diets, we see so many yo-yo dieters. And what that does is, once you put your body into an energy deficit and you go below your resting metabolic rate, you're slowing it down. Your body says, hey, we're very adaptable. Okay, we're not taking in enough calories to even perform basic functions. So what should we do? We're going to slow everything down and we're going to lower our resting metabolic rate. And what happens is when someone does a diet, when they stop that diet, they go back to their eating habits. And now they're increasing their caloric intake, but what they've done is they've actually lowered their resting metabolic rate, and that is when you see more weight gain happen. But the same thing can happen with these distance runners. Although they're training for a marathon, since today marathons are 43% women, most of it's for checking it off a bucket list.
Yeah.
You know, I want to check it off. Most people can't maintain what a professional runner does. So they do all this training and they're increasing their mileage, and now what we found is how much lower their resting metabolic rate was to middle distance runners. And what happens is when they stop training, they've now put their resting metabolic rate so low, and they stop their training, and now they're going back to their poor eating habits again, or even if they don't, they're not expending as many calories. And it's the same concept as a yo-yo diet. So now they end up putting a little bit more weight on, and it kind of fluctuates their metabolism a little bit.
Yeah, and to kind of just also look at the body image aspect. So in our study, we did a questionnaire that asked about 16 to 20 questions about how people perceive their body. And what we did find that both the middle and long distance runners did have a problem with body image. So there is also that aspect in coming in when they're training for a marathon, just saying, I want to lose weight, I want to lose weight. But there's a safe way to lose the weight. And I think that's what we definitely learned in our study. And we learned that these body image problems were kind of influencing what they're eating. And how we did record the diets in our study was had people record for 3 days everything they were eating. And we did see that when people are knowing that they're having to record everything they're eating, they're going to be more careful with their diets. They're going to restrict all the little snacking throughout the day. So that was something that did play a role into our study a little bit, because it's just so much more different when you're recording a diet that you know is being evaluated for caloric intake and stuff like that.
Right, there's always going to be error with our athletes reporting diet to us. There's not much we can do unless you lock someone in a room for a week to know what they're exactly eating. However, I would say the comments that we got from most of our long distance runners were, well, I try to eat low carb. I watch my carb intake. That's not what we should be hearing really from female runners. It's just been so embedded into us that carbohydrates are bad. The same way years ago when it was embedded into us that fat was bad. So I think for the future, and I think what's so important is the types of carbohydrates. There's good fats, there's bad fats. There's good carbohydrates, there's bad carbohydrates. And I feel that these runners have to not be afraid of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates fuel us. If you look at studies that were done on Kenyan runners, male and female Kenyan runners, their diets were over 75% carbohydrates. Which is drastic when you look at what our female runners were doing with 40%, and they were in such a deficit. We did call back a few of our runners a year later after they trained, and we found that their resting metabolic rates were still low. A lot of them did put on body fat because they're not training again for another race. Like I said, there's an off season for our runners. You know, some people might run a marathon and then say, I'll do it in a year or two. And that's the biggest difference, I think, that comes between being a school college athlete or a professional athlete.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of knowing more about just like the type of exercise that you do, which is, I think, another thing that surprised me. A lot of our participants, we were asking them and if they were adding any strength training and any other kind of exercise into their regimen, and a lot of them weren't. Because when you are training for a marathon, you kind of only look at that cardio running aspect and you just think, I have to keep running. But what we did share with a lot of our participants, and I think it is very important for marathon runners to know, is that you should try and incorporate some weightlifting, any sort of strength training into your exercise regimen, because that is how you can build that muscle mass and almost make your body composition in its ideal form for the marathon and your lifestyle in general.
Right. So, you know, in a society now where I think the biggest questions we both get asked, being that we have a nutrition background, is what do you feel about the Atkins diet? How do you feel about the ketogenic diet? How do you feel about all this? So, the one thing that surprised me was how high fat these diets were. And that again comes from being fearful of carbohydrates and picking the wrong protein. So your body, if you look at research, it can only, for marathon runners, for females, the highest they recorded was 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. And I know everybody looks at me and says, oh my God, I don't even know what my kilogram body weight is. But it's not a lot. And if you eat above that, your body is not absorbing that. I think people have to understand that when you are going high protein, you so easily can go into a high fat diet. And I don't want to poo-poo fat, because it's not bad, but when you go for high protein, we noticed that they were choosing the wrong ones. It put them into a high fat diet and a low carbohydrate diet. To go into a ketogenic, so some people say, well, high fat is now the big fad with ketogenic. What people don't understand with the ketogenic diet is you're looking at 10 grams of carbohydrates a day. It's extremely difficult to maintain that. The ketogenic diet was made for children with epilepsy years ago in the 1920s. Some chronic diseases today swear by it with cancer and everything, and we're not taking away from that. What we're strictly looking at right here is distant female runners and what they should be maintaining. It is very difficult to maintain a ketogenic diet. Paleo diet, again, was voted online as one of the most difficult diets to maintain. You want to eat in a way that is comparable to your lifestyle. You don't want to go too long of a time without eating, because your body needs to be fueled. You can't go all day and say, oh, I'm going to eat all my calories at night because I'm starving. So the timing of the food was definitely an issue with our athletes as well.
Definitely. And I think it's also important to just kind of stress that you need to take into account your energy expenditure. So we were really surprised that when we were comparing the amount our long and middle distance runners were running and their energy deficit and how little they were eating over their resting metabolic rate, it was shocking, because the long distance runners were running almost triple of what the middle distance runners were, but they were taking in close to the same amount of calories.
Yeah. They're taking the same amount of calories.
Yeah.
And they average 30 miles a week training, which is about average for marathon training, where the other group is only averaging about 9 miles a week training. So that was a significant difference in mileage, and to eat the same amount and the same ratio was alarming.
Yeah. Definitely.
And yet the middle distance runners had significantly higher resting metabolic rates.
Yeah, they did.
So, all right, so we are going to take some questions from all of you who are hopefully watching. Does your age make a difference? This is from Lisa Swow. Does your age make a difference once you are over 45 years old? Unfortunately, yes. There's nothing exciting about getting older and training. This study was done with 20-year-olds because that's the pool we started with. As we age, we lose muscle mass. We lose muscle mass with every decade. You don't have to, that's the good news, which is why as this study progresses, we would really urge women who are in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s to really incorporate strength training into this and make sure that they take in the right amount of protein and carbohydrates. This study will go further into, we're going to do each decade but the aging female and the aging male, this holds true also for. As we age, we lose muscle mass. Typically it starts in your 40s, especially after menopause, it gets much worse. And strength training has to be really incorporated to maintain that.
Yeah. Okay, so Briley asks, I heard recently the sugar is the real enemy. How does sugar impact your performance as an athlete? So as we were talking about, there are different types of sugars. So there's simple carbohydrates and there's complex. So I think the real difference in them is the fact that they give you the kind of like length and endurance to maintain long-term energy and exercise performance. So not all sugar is bad, especially if you are high in complex carbohydrates. That is not bad for you. But
free sugar, I would say the term sugar is broad here. Sugar comes in all things fructose, sucrose. And again, I do want to stress, but when we tested them and we were looking at free sugars, it does not include when you're doing a long distance run and you're taking in gel packs with the sugar in it. That's different. That's while you're exercising. However, how does sugar impact it? It has a very high glycemic index, and what that means is it spikes your blood sugar very quickly, but it also lowers it very quickly, and will put you almost where your body's hungry again. So you want to choose a carbohydrate exactly how Nina just said, that takes longer to digest and keeps your blood sugar at a relatively level amount so that you're not hungry all the time. Is sugar absolutely the worst thing in the world? No, sometimes, but what happens if you don't fuel your body right, as runners, you're going to crave that sugar because your body wants to fuel itself. Yeah. So I would say just be mindful of free sugar in your foods and keep it to a limit. But again, this does not include while you're training and you're out there for doing a long distance run. Yeah, because we did find that a lot of our participants were telling us we're always hungry and we just keep not having enough energy to keep going on, and we keep snacking and stuff like that, and they were asking us how to kind of avoid that, and that's definitely what the issue was. So Julie, what are some good tools athletes can use to help manage their diets and metabolisms? And we knew we were going to get this question because we get this question from everybody. It's extremely overwhelming. Keep in mind, most athletes get their information from the internet. Very few of you out there, I'm sure, have actually visited a nutritionist or a dietitian about this. There are tools online. Just be careful where your sources come from. There are actually fabulous tools online. And I tell people, this study was done for distance. One of the best places you get it is actually the marathon website. So you have the New York City Marathon, you have Marine Corps marathons. Look for the larger marathons, and they have programs that you can join that they already know that they have experienced coaches on there. There's also active.com, and I don't endorse any particular website, but there are a lot of websites that are very misleading. But Active, again, you want someone who uses certified coaches. There are plenty of websites that you could type in your body weight and how your active is, and it will actually break down your macronutrient intake for you. Another excellent tool that the beautiful thing about today's day and age is the technology. So I'm wearing this, which is a Garmin tracker, and Fitbit makes them. There's so many out there that can actually, are they 100% accurate? Absolutely not, but it might get you in the ballpark of how many calories you're burning in a day. And we have apps like MyFitnessPal or Fitbit that you can go on and, again, track your diet. I challenge everybody all the time to challenge your diet. Take 3 days in, really look at where your food is coming from and see where and you could just hit a button and it will break down your macronutrient intake for you. And that's the beauty of technology today, is that it can do it for you. And you'd be surprised where you're getting your fat from, where you're getting your carbohydrates from. So I do urge people to use websites like that. Again, marathon websites, active.com. American College of Sports Medicine has great articles that you can read on it. And they'll always have links to other organizations that have certified professionals. Just make sure when you get your advice from people that it's either a coach or a professional.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Ashley says, I'm about to start training for a race. Is there a resource I should use if I'm looking for a diet specialized to me and my body type? So yes, as we said, it does vary based on the body type. So I would say look for apps out there. But be careful with what you're reading and make sure it is specialized to your body type. And there are places where you can go and get this indirect calorimetry. I know the campus here at NYIT does it. And there are places you can go and see your specific body fat composition, and that'll definitely help.
Right. So you said you were training for a marathon. I don't know which marathon you're training for, but again, I would urge you to look at their website. They have training programs. They have nutrition counseling. They do charge sometimes if you don't have the money for it. There are guidelines, there are other links that they can give you for it. We do test it here. Just be careful. I do tell people, I would urge a marathon runner not to get on a scale. At the Athletic Association of the Olympics, they don't use BMI for athletes because it doesn't take into muscle. Keep in mind, as Briley, when you're training for a marathon, it's not uncommon to put weight on. You're increasing glycogen stores. So what happens is a lot of females get on the scale and they start freaking out because they put weight on while they're training. But it's not important. That's water weight. I would definitely urge you, if you do have a local gym that has a certified personal trainer who coaches, there's tons of coaches out there that do marathon training. Find one, and if it's a small amount of money, it's a small price to pay for the health of your body and understanding how to train properly.
Okay, so Nathan asks, what about those of us who just like to run so that we can eat more junk food? Is that bad?
I'm going to address that by another research study that came out there that just want to eat junk food. A lot of people say, I exercise so I can eat bad. Not uncommon, we all do it. A lot of people say, junk food is not a bad thing. We're all going to, if life and obesity in this country was as simple as saying eat a carrot instead of a cookie, we would all be in a good place. But we have cravings and we like our junk food. Keep it to a limitation. If you like to run and have your cookies, that's fine. But I also tell people, keep in mind that you're also working really hard. Do you want to negate all that hard work for eating something that might not be worth it? But they did do a study that showed with people who did cardiovascular exercise and people who didn't, how they ate. And they actually showed that the people who did cardiovascular exercise put more weight on because they felt like they earned that cookie. Whereas the people who didn't exercise didn't earn the cookie. Yeah. So there is, a psychological component to that. Did you earn your cookie from doing moderate exercise? Once in a while, you earn the cookie, but.
Okay, so Evan asks, did runners with poor body image have worse diets than the one that had good body image?
They were in more deficit, actually. They had more of a restricted energy deficit. Than the ones who had poor image. And again, that comes from the cycle of they're so fearful of gaining weight. And I think that's just so much more common in women because, again, you get on a scale, it's not uncommon to put weight on a scale because you do have water and muscle glycogen stores that are building that could put weight on a scale and cause them to eat less or run more. It goes either way. Some people say, oh, God, the only way I have to lose weight is to run more. Or they just start eating less. And again, that's going to affect performance.
Okay, so Libby asks, you mentioned keto and paleo diets. How can regular people, not marathon runners, find out about which eating regimen is healthiest for their lifestyle?
We knew we were going to get questions off the running marathon path. There is no right answer for that to your lifestyle. Every body type is different. Some people, like potato chips. Some people like chocolate as their junk food. What works for you is, I personally like pasta. I know in my life I will never give up pasta. It's just not going to happen. So I would never put myself on a diet that took pasta out because I'm restricting myself. What diet would work for you? Keep in mind, most of these diets work because they're calorie restriction to begin with. Deprivation does not work. So if you're on a diet that you feel like you're depriving yourself, it's not going to last. And if you are eating for 3 or 4 weeks and you realize, wow, I'm losing weight, but I'm miserable, I can't maintain this, it's not the right diet for you. My best advice for someone who doesn't train and is really looking for the right diet is write it down in an app. See what you're eating and what you like. And then first cut that portion in half, because usually it's portion sizes that you'll see what do it. Cut the portion sizes in half. And then see maybe where you can modify something that you really like to make it a little bit less fattening.
Okay, so Sherry asks, as a former college athlete who is a runner, I have moved my training into weightlifting and find myself eating more, especially carbohydrates. What is the best pre- and post-workout meal?
Again, that's a loaded question for best of pre and post for strength training and running. The one thing that I will tell you is that with the research that's out there with females, and again, the research was very different with male and females on this one, is they found the best combination for post-workout had to have a little bit of everything in it, carbohydrates and protein with a little bit of fat. They did do a study where they did just carbohydrates as a post-recovery, and they found that glycogen stores were not actually fulfilled as much. So just what's out there now is, again, something with a little bit of fat and a little bit of protein and a little bit of carbohydrates was the best recovery. Pre-workout is a very personal choice. I have people who tell me I'm too nervous before racing to eat anything. I get nauseous when I eat. Well, then obviously you're not. So maybe a small protein shake with a little carbs in it before you eat would be a good thing to have. Some people don't work out at all well with eating anything. There's not much you can do about that. If someone gets nauseous, I just tell them maybe a couple of bites of banana or granola or something like that. You do beforehand want a little bit more carbohydrates in your diet because that's what's fueling you. Post-workout, I would say make it a good combination of all of them.
Definitely. Okay. What are the societal pressures impacting female runners? Do other athletes face these?
Other athletes in sports that require physique and leanness definitely face it.
Yeah.
You look at ballet dancers.
Yeah.
Some other sports, cheerleading, anything that requires someone to actually look the part it suffers from this.
Yeah.
Even female swimmers is another one that they look at. That ice skaters is another one that they've actually shown they even have bone density issues at such a young age. Gymnasts, another body image. So it's not just female distance runners. It definitely goes with someone who has these sports that are non-contact that require a lighter, leaner physique.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. Feel free to go ahead and like and share the video on your Facebook page. Do you have any last
No, just make sure you like us on the Facebook page. And honestly, after reading things like this, a lot of questions come after the fact. And please post your pictures, post your questions later on.
Yeah.
We're always fielding questions, whether you're a runner or not, especially if you're a female out there and you're just confused about what you should do. The only thing I love to take home message for everybody who did watch this is ask yourself 2 questions. How many calories do you take in a day? Because I'm sure most of you cannot answer that question. And how many calories should you be taking in a day? It's something that I think everybody should really understand about their own bodies.
Yeah, and we will post a few of the links of the websites we were talking about. That could be something to go to if you were looking to train for a marathon and what diet you should be taking.
So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.